Hi, my name is Jo-AnnEyre Cruz. Just a little bit about myself. I happen to have a very unique background. I am currently the Director of Guidance at Great Neck South High School. I have been the director, this is my fifth year of being the director. I have been a school counselor uh, for 14 years, an educator for 18. I started as a middle school math teacher at a Catholic school in the Bronx. And it's been wonderful working in education. As a long, lifelong learner, I have always enjoyed to look for answers to questions. I actually um, lived in 4 different countries and attended 4 different academic settings. I've lived and attended school in Mexico, in Singapore, in Canada, and the United States. My mom and I moved to New York when I was 13, actually 14 at the time. And I came here at the end of my 8th grade. So I was placed in a high school that was zoned for where I lived. At the time, I lived in Brooklyn, and I was zoned to Lafayette High School, which actually doesn't exist anymore. And at one point was considered one of the worst high schools in New York City. But when I went to Lafayette High School, I was placed in a computer engineering program because I had good math scores from the 8th grade and the grade math assessment. Um, I was then fortunate to have worked in the office of the assistant principal that was in charge of counseling, who then placed me in an honors program at the school in the middle of my 9th grade. And there's where I was able to take some honors and EP level courses. And from there, I was able to obtain a full academic scholarship to St. Francis College, where I attended and obtained my undergraduate degree in psychology. I also then thought about going to law school, took the LSAT, worked at a law firm, realized it wasn't for me. A good friend of mine was able to give me the opportunity to work at a Catholic school. I didn't want to do that at first, but then he convinced me to give it a try, and I did, and I loved it and have never looked back since. I was very intrigued by my own experience in the fact that I was basically, I was an immigrant, first generation, single parent, living in the poverty line, technically ENL student, not when I came to New York, but when I went to Canada. Um, and the fact that I didn't fall through the cracks, going to quote unquote, not the most of affluent schools. And I then having the experience of working at a very affluent school and seeing the dynamic of what I witnessed in my honors program, which was the fact that I was the only Latina in my honors program in my high school, and seeing that the representation of students in AP level coursework was lacking. So that really made me think, like, what is going on if we're an affluent school that has all these different services for students and individual treatment? What is going on with that? Which led me to my dissertation, my research, which I will be sharing with you. So I am going to share with you my presentation. And so my initial idea was in regards to the excellence gap, and I was fortunate to work with Dr. Cho. Initially, I was just intrigued to find out what was going on, what was happening in the underrepresentation of students of color, mostly Hispanic Latinos, in courses of advanced study like AP and honors. And in going through my research for my dissertation, I was really intrigued with expectations and perceived expectations. So that's how I ended up with my topic. So obviously, when I was going through research, I realized that there wasn't a lot of data in regard to specific gaps in high-performing schools, where underrepresented students were not, taking courses such as AP and honors. So I, of course, wanted to gather information. Initially, I wanted to test perceived expectations, and I realized that there wasn't an actual test or instrument that measured perceived expectations, which was something that I then figured could be, well, thanks to Dr. Cho, something that I could create an instrument to be used in research. So again, in looking at all the different research, I really was intrigued by, that gap in the honors and AP level coursework, advanced coursework. And again, that was something that stuck out to me in my experiences. And in that, I also was looking to see a scale that would measure perceived expectations. So I used Rosenthal's self-fulfilling prophecy, Atkinson's expectancy value theory, and also the concept mapping method in obtaining an instrument and combining that in showing how expectations and perceived expectations would be something important to know in looking at certain gaps in schools. So I did a lot of research. Have to be honest, I went down a rabbit hole of research. Some of the most impactful research that I did find was from Chambers. There was a lot of research in regards to gaps and especially excellence gaps and opportunity gaps. Actually, I used a paper from a St. John's professor regarding the achievement gap in math. So a lot of these articles were really impacted my research and where I went with my research. And then in concept mapping, I was, very guided by the process, a very specific process of concept mapping. It's a very, very involved and valuable way of really obtaining some very useful data in creating instruments with having input from the students or the people that would be most impacted by the instrument itself. So I found that to be a very good match in what I was looking to do. Again, Dr. Cho was the one that introduced me to the idea of concept mapping. Again, my research question really had in mind the fact that many of the research in regards to gaps talked about the lack of funding, poor quality schools, underprepared teachers, and that's not the case in affluent schools, yet those gaps still exist. Now, those gaps are harder to find because technically those schools might be achieving in regards to their Latino population, but there is still a gap within the school. And sometimes that has been called the school within the school situation, where there's a group of students in a school that's very high academically achieving that are not quite reaching the same standards as the majority of the students that attend the school. And again, with the concept mapping, I really use concept mapping in a way to develop an instrument to measure students' perceived expectations from teachers, school counselors, school personnel, and parent expectations. So this is the breakdown of the students in my study. With concept mapping, you need a minimum of 12 students to be able to run a valid research, and I was able to obtain 18 students, and this is the breakdown of the students that took part in my study. Again, they were students that were participants and that participated were, in this study, And I did purposely sample students to make sure I had a well-rounded student body that I was able to really get some data from in regard to a diverse group of students. And again, creating a concept, using concept mapping to create an instrument was the purpose of my study. So when in actually pursuing my study, I had 4 sessions where I was able to, again, follow the very specific 6-step model of preparation, generation, structuring, representation, interpretation, and utilization that concept mapping introduces. So there's a brainstorming session where I met with the students. Then I was able to do a second session, which was sorting and rating data with the participants. And they were able, so that I could then put the data in a way that is visually representative. After that, I was able to demonstrate to the students the visual representation and to have an interpretation. After which I did do a survey where they gave me some input on the cluster labels, and participants were asked to vote on their choice of the labels and rank them. The final session where the students were able to look at the map and determine if it made sense, and it was if the visual structure of the focus statement made sense. So again, I did use the concept system Global Max system. It's a fabulous system. It really gives a lot of visual aid. It's a system that does everything. I created the questionnaire inside the survey within the concept system Global Max. And the students completed it there, and I was able to then get the data from what the students submitted. And then I was able to get these visuals and these clusters that I was able to show students so that they can see where their answers were clustered together and be able to define them. So, based on the interpretation stage, I was able to go down to 9 clusters. I was able to determine clusters and name each cluster based on the feedback from the students, so that I showed them this. We looked over the questions that existed in each. So each number that you see here is an actual response or question. So that response from a student, so that we could read all the statements, and then I was able to then categorize the statements to see what they had in common. So I was able to, with the students' help, name each statement from the results. So these were all the I guess the labels that were agreed upon by the students. Then after that, I was able to create go zones based on students' demographics. So I could get go zones, for the whole group and for subgroup. So it was really interesting to see the different go zones. And again, the go zones, the green zones were those those were the most highly rated statements. Again, so with the survey that I asked for students to submit to me was their definition of what expectations meant to them and how someone would show an expectations. So these were all the statements that the students responded, and how these were then categorized and put into go zones. So then based on a combination of ranking data, which the students ranked all the statements, right? And then I did the go zones in order to do the reduction and selection. I was able to look at certain statements. So I see, as you can see, some statements were, rated highly by all my my groupings, right? So my groupings were by gender, by ethnicity, and so I was able to see what statements were highly rated by the entire group, all the groups, and what were lower rated. Then I was able to go in and look at the statements that were highly rated only by certain groups, such as Latino groups and Asian group. So I was able to really see some of the differences and things that like stood out. So for the Latino group, the fact that if someone has a certain expectation, that person will want you to complete it to the best of your ability, believe in you, support you. And then the Asian students had be disappointed if you fail, have different standards for you compared to everyone else. If you consistently fail, they don't ask for much. And an expectations how people expect you to be. So it was very interesting to see the difference, the way that they rank the statements within the subgroups. Ultimately, with all what I was able to gather, I was able to put together an inventory. Now, the inventory I was able to give to my students to look at, to see the students in the group, to get some of the feedback from them and what they felt. However, I was not able to validate the instrument. That would be something that would be good for future research in being able to validate the study. And I hope that if this instrument is ever validated, if anybody is interested in doing that for their research, that this can maybe be something that be useful in a school setting that can help with some decisions to be done in a school level. Now, the reason that I really was interested in looking at expectations and perceived expectations was from the research that all the research that I received. At first I thought just expectations, right? Many research have done like asking educators about the expectations they have of other students. But I was interested in what are the students perceiving? So a teacher might think that their expectations are equal for all students, but a student might not perceive that at a teacher level, maybe a counselor level, and an administrator level, as a school system, as a school building. So some of the research that I really, really loved, such as Chambers, really talked about, the culture of a school, what messages were being sent, what norms were created. Were the norms created on our Eurocentric definition of what intelligence is, what high achieving is? I really looked into some definitions of intelligence and what how is that portrayed. There was some very interesting research that I saw that talked about, some intelligences that are not per se viewed as in an academic setting, but in some of our students where they're navigating different worlds, where they might be doing a lot of things that adults for their parents, for example. We have some students that take on very adult responsibilities in budgeting and in time management, and is that something that is rewarded, I guess, in an academic setting? They're not graded for that, but it is an intelligence in being to navigate. There was a lot of talk from Chambers about mergers and weavers and the intelligence of being able to live in two different worlds, in two different cultures, right? In having teacher pleasing behavior, where the way you talk, how I'm talking now, maybe it's differently than how I would talk with my girlfriends in Brooklyn, for example, talking in a stoop. I might not be talking in this manner with my girlfriends from Brooklyn. And how I was able to learn how to navigate those worlds and have that be my success, and how that led to some successes. So I really was so interested in that, in understanding of perceived expectations from a student's perspective. And the fact that there's no instrument to measure that really propelled me to trying to create one. So I hope that this gives you some inspiration. It gave you some information. And I wish you luck in your future research. So with that, thank you.